The air was thick, not with oxygen, but with ozone and the scent of ages, stone dust, cold metal, and a faint metallic tang. Kale knew was dried blood. Captain Kale Rook Renwick stood perfectly still, his hands cuffed behind him by energy binders that hummed a warning against any sudden movement. He was in the Grand Council chamber of Noctis Prime, the heart of the Kalan star system. It was a cathedral of power, 2 stories of ancient ornate stained glass depicting scenes of endless, brutal conquest, lit by the cold, cyan glow of tactical holograms hovering over half a dozen occupied council thrones. Heavy, black-armored sentinels lined the walls, and the quiet whir of floating surveillance drones was the only sound besides the ragged rhythm of Kale's own breath. In the center of this grim spectacle was her. Lady Valeriana Noctis was a legend, a myth whispered in the Terran Coalition's barracks as the Vampire Empress, the one who never lost a battle. The thumbnail had captured her perfectly, tall, intimidating, and regal. Her full-plate armor was black obsidian, etched with silver filigree, and her sweeping crimson cloak pooled around her boots. She didn't walk, she descended. Her long black hair cascaded over her shoulders, framing a face of devastating ageless beauty, made utterly terrifying by the piercing incandescent glow of her crimson eyes. Kale looked up, meeting those eyes without flinching. That was the first rule of survival he'd learned in the Vanguard: never break eye contact with the apex predator. Valeriana stopped right in front of him, her shadow engulfing his Vanguard battlesuit. She was a foot taller than his 6 feet, and the heavy gauntlet resting on his shoulder in the exact pose from the captured image felt less like a threat and more like a casual claim of ownership. "Look at him, my lords and ladies." Valeriana's voice was a low, resonant purr, yet it carried through the cavernous hall like a sonic boom. "A Terran. A mortal." A wave of low, guttural chuckles rippled from the council members, ancient Kalan vampires in similar, though less elaborate, armor. They were judging him, weighing his life in ounces. He breached the Erebos gate. A voice hissed from one of the thrones, Lord Zarkin, Valeriana's aging war minister. An act of impossible audacity. He must be executed publicly. A message to the warmongers of Terra. Valeriana pressed her thumb, armored and sharp, into the glowing blue insignia on Kale's chest plate. Audacity, yes, but also skill. He is designated Rook, is that correct, Captain Renwick? Kale will do, he replied, his voice rough but steady. His training kicked in, filtering out fear. And the designation was Rook. I'm off the board now, I guess. Valeriana's lips, full and dark, curved into a faint, predatory smile. It didn't reach her eyes. Oh no, Kale. You are very much on my board. You've brought an interesting complexity to my otherwise dull game. She gestured, and a holographic screen flickered to life beside her. It displayed Kale's entire service record, all his Black Ops missions, his impossible successful infiltrations, and the dozens of Kalan assets he had dismantled. You are an enemy of my people, Valeriana stated, tracing the line of his jaw with a gloved finger. You are mortal, fleeting, and fragile. Your existence is an insult to the longevity of the Kalan. Yet, you achieve feats of strategy that my own generals fail to manage. She leaned in, her eyes boring into his. Kale could smell the faint, iron-rich scent of her power. Tell me, Kale, why the suicide mission? Why come so deep into my territory alone? Intelligence, Kale said simply, ignoring the painful pressure of the cuffs. The Terran Coalition needed to know how the Kalan were bypassing the Concordium blockade. The mention of the Galactic Concordium caused a palpable shift in the hall's atmosphere. The council members shifted uncomfortably and Valeriana's eyes narrowed. The Concordium, Valeriana spat the name like venom. That collection of bureaucratic insects in their High Council Alaric. They call themselves civilized, yet their blockade starves whole quadrants and forces the Kalan, a superior race, to trade in shadow. She gripped Kale's shoulder tighter, her focus momentarily shifting from his offense to a shared resentment. You see, Kale, your people and my people are both viewed as problems by the Concordium. We are the barbaric variables they wish to control or, failing that, exterminate. We're not the ones draining life from entire planetary populations, Kale countered, his voice low. The temperature in the chamber seemed to drop instantly. Valeriana laughed, a harsh, low sound. Still clinging to the propaganda? We feed only where necessary. The Concordium's slow chokehold stars the spirit of millions across the galaxy. Which death is kinder, Kale? A swift, controlled end or a slow, political decay? She walked to her main throne, her magnificent armor gleaming. She sat, an empress framed by the ancient stained glass warriors. The council waited for the judgment. Kale Renwick, Captain, Valeriana began, her voice taking on the tone of an official decree. Your life is forfeit by the laws of my ancient court. My generals demand your head on a spike. My people demand a spectacle. Kale closed his eyes, accepting his fate. He'd been prepared for this outcome the moment his infiltration ship was vaporized. But, Valeriana continued, the word hanging heavy in the air. I refuse to be predictable. Execution is wasteful. You are a unique perspective, an anomaly of mortal strategy. I did not spend 1,000 years building this empire just to follow the archaic rulings of my advisors or the demands of a distant, irrelevant council. She stood again, slowly, majestically. I have a different sentence for you, Captain. You will not die today. You will live as my personal strategic asset. You will observe my court. You will advise me on the predictable failings of the mortal mind, the very mind that executed your impossible mission. Lord Zarkin exploded from his chair. Empress, this is madness. He is a spy. A dog. Valeriana didn't even look at Zarkin. Her crimson gaze was locked solely on Kale. If he is a dog, Zarkin, then he is my dog. And I decide where and when he is leashed. She raised her voice, letting the authority of millennia settle over the room. Kale Renwick will be granted provisional status within the Obsidian Citadel. He is to be guarded at all times, but his needs, all his needs, are to be met. His life is my property, and anyone who lays a hostile hand on him will answer to me directly. She descended the steps again, dismissing the council's protests with a wave of her hand. She came to Kale and, with a subtle motion, deactivated the energy binders. Kale rubbed his wrists, his muscles screaming. Welcome to Noctis Prime, Captain Kale Renwick, she whispered, her eyes softening by the barest fraction. The emotion was fleeting, complex, and utterly intriguing. You survived my fleet. Now let us see if you can survive my court. She turned and began walking away, her cloak billowing behind her. Kale was left standing alone, a mortal in a palace of ancient vampires, his life spared not by mercy, but by an empress's calculated and dangerous curiosity. The game had just begun. The Obsidian Citadel was a masterpiece of lethal architecture. Kale was assigned quarters in the highest spire, a lavish apartment that felt more like a gilded cage. Every piece of furniture, carved from a dense, obsidian-like material, felt heavy with the weight of Kalen history. His guard was a single, towering Kalen named Draken. Draken didn't speak much. He simply existed, a shadow of black armor whose presence was a constant, unnerving reminder of Kale's captivity. Days turned into a grueling routine. Kale was summoned daily to the strategy rooms, a high-tech bunker beneath the throne room, where Lady Valeriana commanded her vast military operations. The irony was brutal, a Terran vanguard captain, advising the very empire his people were fighting. Your blockade strategy is flawed, Empress, Kale said one morning, pointing a holographic stylus at a cluster of star systems marked in angry red. Valeriana's generals, all ancient aristocratic vampires with rigid faces and even more rigid views, tensed at his casual address. Valeriana, however, leaned closer, her long fingers steepled under her chin. Elaborate, Kale. And be swift. Lord Zarkin already wishes to drain your insolent blood. Kale ignored the War Minister's glare. You're using 3 full Obsidian Fleet sectors to maintain a passive perimeter. The Galactic Concordium doesn't fight fair, Valeriana. High Consul Alaric will use those sectors' stability against you. He'll send a Vesperian Ghost Fleet, small hyperstealth, right through the gap, not to attack but to seed revolt on your peripheral planets. Valeriana's crimson eyes flashed with sudden interest. The other generals scoffed. A mortal's fear-mongering, scoffed General Lyra, a powerful but overly proud Kalen commander. The Vesperians are predictable. They fight with logistics, not guerrilla tactics. That's exactly what Alaric wants you to think, Kale shot back, his vanguard training overriding any fear of the general. He knows your strengths are fleet to fleet. He also knows your weakness is your aristocracy. If the Kalen people see their empress allowing mortal populations to revolt and damage the fleet supplies, your internal stability collapses before he even fires a main cannon. Valeriana slapped her hand onto the holotable, silencing the room. The map reconfigured instantly based on Kale's theory. If you are right, Kale, this saves us months of resources and avoids unnecessary bloodshed. She looked at him, her gaze a mixture of professional respect and deep, personal curiosity. You do not think like a Kalen. You do not think like an Alaric. I think like the person who has to clean up after you two fight, Kale murmured. That night, Valeriana visited his quarters. Draken merely bowed and vanished. Valeriana wasn't in her armor. She wore a simple, though luxurious, dark velvet gown, making her appear slightly less like a deity of war and more like a very dangerous woman. The council is enraged by your presence, she said, pouring a glass of dark, metallic-smelling wine for herself. She offered Kale a simple glass of water, a small, subtle acknowledgement of his mortality. They whisper that I have allowed myself to be tainted by a lesser race. They're not wrong. Kale took a sip of water. I am immortal. I'm the enemy. But I'm also the only one who doesn't treat you like an abstract power to be served, but a commander to be challenged. Valeriana walked slowly toward the panoramic window overlooking Noctis Prime, a city of vertical, brooding towers. My life is a constant performance of power, Kale. My people demand it. The Concordium fears it. Only you look at me and see an exploitable weakness. I see a brilliant mind trapped by tradition, Kale corrected, moving closer. The air between them was crackling, thick with unspoken tension. You are the first leader I've met who can see beyond the end of her own lifespan. You're playing a game for the next millennium, Valeriana. And you need pawns who can see the short-term threats. Her eyes drifted down to his lips. I have never known a mortal with such audacity. Do you understand the risk you run, speaking to your captor this way? If I feared death, I wouldn't have come here, Kale stated, meeting her gaze squarely. You won't kill me, Valeriana? Not yet. I'm too useful and frankly, I think you're bored. The predatory smile returned, wider this time but somehow less cruel. Perhaps. But your definition of useful may soon diverge from mine. The unspoken tension broke 2 weeks later, during a deep space siege simulation. Kale had pushed Valeriana's forces to a crushing defeat, exploiting an emotional weakness in General Lyra's command structure. Valeriana stood before her generals, a storm of fury contained within her regal composure. Lyra's arrogance cost us a quarter of the projected fleet. A mortal saw through your tactical posturing in under 3 hours. It is a mortal's trickery, Empress, Zarkin argued desperately. This thing pollutes our minds, our strategies. Send him back to his cell. Enough, Zarkin, Valeriana snapped. She dismissed the council, her attention fixed on Kale, who stood silently, observing the fallout of his success. Later, in a hidden, isolated observation deck overlooking the city, Valeriana approached Kale, her movements fluid and purposeful. You have humiliated my oldest advisors, she noted, her voice low. They will not rest until you are undone. I'm just doing my job, Kale shrugged. Exposing vulnerabilities. It's what I do. And what about my vulnerabilities, Kale? She asked, stepping close enough for him to feel the residual chill radiating from her. He didn't back down. They are vast. You rely too much on ancient loyalty. You crave intellectual parity, but your court only offers blind obedience. Valeriana tilted her head, her eyes holding his. And you, mortal? What do you crave? Survival. A win. And honestly, a reason to care about this conflict. Valeriana reached up, her armored hand cupping the back of his neck. Her touch, always calculated, was now laced with something elemental and dangerous. I can give you all 3, Kale Renwick. Survival is earned. The win is in doubt. And a reason to care. She pulled him toward her with surprising force, her lips crashing against his. It was not a kiss of romance but of claim, feral, demanding and overwhelming. Kale responded with the suppressed fire of a man who had been caged for too long, a mortal soldier embracing a terrifying, beautiful oblivion. The shock was total. It was the absolute violation of Kaelan law, the ultimate act of defiance against her own culture and the power of the Concordium. When she finally pulled back, her eyes were burning with a terrifying mix of lust and self-disgust. This, she whispered, her voice rough, is contamination. It is weakness. And yet, I will not regret it. Valeriana knew this forbidden connection was a political time bomb. If the Galactic Council, specifically High Consul Alaric, discovered their relationship, it wouldn't just mean Kale's death. It would be a pretext for an immediate, devastating war against the Kaelan star system. And the Council was already watching. On a cold, distant satellite of the Galactic Concordium, High Consul Alaric, a tall Vesperian being whose eyes were cold, multifaceted lenses, watched the encrypted footage of the forbidden embrace. The Kaelan Empress is compromised. Alaric's voice was a dry, synthesized click. The biological contaminant, the mortal Renwick, has succeeded in his infiltration. Issue the ultimatum. War preparations are now at full readiness. This is the opportunity to purge the instability from the galaxy. The stage was set. Valeriana had chosen a mortal over her own code. The Council was about to force her to choose between the man she loved and the empire she ruled. The day the message arrived, the cold light in the obsidian citadel seemed to dim. Valeriana stood alone in her private audience chamber, dressed in her most imposing ceremonial armor, but without her crown. Kale stood beside her, his vanguard uniform feeling thin and inadequate against the immense weight of the moment. He had witnessed Valeriana in command, in passion, and in rage, but never in such concentrated dread. The holographic transmission flickered to life, projecting the massive, skeletal form of High Consul Alaric. The Vesperian leader was an imposing figure, his head a cluster of crystalline lenses that showed no emotion, only cold, hyperlogical judgment. Lady Valeriana Noctis. Alaric's voice was a low, synthesized rasp that echoed the combined authority of the Galactic Concordium. Your actions constitute a direct, biological and political threat to the stability of the known systems. My actions are my own, Alaric, Valeriana replied, her voice steady, though her hands were clenched at her sides. They do not concern your Concordium. On the contrary, Alaric countered. The holoscreen behind him shifted, displaying the encrypted footage of Kale and Valeriana's forbidden embrace, magnified and displayed for all to see. The image was sickeningly intimate. The life form, Kale Renwick, is an enemy of the Concordium, a combatant of the Terran Coalition, and now, a genetic contaminant within the highest echelon of the Kalan star system. A horrified silence fell over Valeriana's chamber. Kale felt a cold dread wash over him. Alaric continued his dry, damning monologue. This union is proof of Kalan instability and moral decay. It grants the Terran Coalition access to your strategic thinking, and worse, it introduces unpredictable mortal volatility into a race meant to embody cold, ancient power. Alaric's gaze, or rather the collective gaze of his crystalline eyes, fell upon Kale. The Concordium demands his immediate transfer to our custody for proper containment and termination. Valeriana's eyes narrowed into slits of crimson fire. You dare demand the life of one under my protection? We dare demand the stability of the galaxy, Alaric corrected. Your compliance, Valeriana, will be seen as a sign of your renewed commitment to the Concordium's laws. You have one solar cycle to execute the mortal, or we will assume that the Kalan star system has declared war on the Galactic Concordium. The choice is yours, Empress. Duty or weakness. The transmission ended, leaving Valeriana and Kale alone in the charged silence. Kale stepped forward, placing a hand on her armored forearm. Valeriana, listen to me. This is what I was trained for. I can't let you sacrifice your empire for me. Tell them I was a forced asset, that you executed me. We can fake the signal, I can go dark, disappear. Valeriana turned, her height imposing even in her distress. She shook her head, the movement tight and furious. You do not understand, Kale. This is not about you. This is about power. If I comply, I prove to the Concordium, and to my own council, that I can be dictated to. I show weakness. And a weak empress is overthrown by her own generals or annihilated by her enemies. She stared at the door, behind which she knew Lord Zarkin and General Lyra were waiting, listening, hoping she would choose the safe path. I can't live like that, Valeriana whispered, her voice cracking for the first time. I have ruled for 2 millennia, not by obedience but by fear and defiance. I will not trade my power, and the only genuine connection I have found in centuries, for a temporary peace dictated by a machine. She placed her gauntlet hand on Kale's cheek, her eyes reflecting the crimson light of the Citadel. If I am going to lose my empire, Kale, I will lose it fighting for what I choose, not for what Alaric demands. The next day the Grand Council chamber was overflowing. Every Kalan aristocrat, every general, and every major media projection link across the star system was focused on the obsidian throne. Valeriana stood at the podium, fully crowned and armored, the crimson cloak trailing behind her like a river of spilled blood. She radiated cold, untouchable power. Kale was brought in by Draken, his expression grave, and stood slightly behind the podium, a deliberate move to signify he was not on trial but with the Empress. Lord Zarkin, emboldened by Alaric's ultimatum, stepped forward. Empress, the time is past. The Concordium demands a blood price. You must announce the execution of the mortal and prove your loyalty to the Kalan way. A chorus of agreement erupted from the council. Valeriana raised a single gauntlet. The noise vanished instantly. I have received the ultimatum from High Consul Alaric, Valeriana announced, her voice ringing with amplified authority. He demands the life of Kale Renwick and my submission to the Concordium's political will. She paused, letting the statement hang in the tense air. My people, she declared, her eyes sweeping over the chamber. The Galactic Concordium does not seek peace. It seeks conquest by decree. They have used this mortal, a connection they view as biological contamination, as a test of my spine, a test of Kalan resolve. Valeriana turned and looked at Kale. Kale stood tall, ready for whatever came next, a bullet, a blade, or a declaration of war. The history of the Kalan Empire is built on defiance, Valeriana proclaimed. We do not bow. We do not negotiate under threat. We do not surrender our assets, tactical or personal, to bureaucratic insects. She looked back at the council, her voice now a powerful roar. Alaric calls Kale Renwick a threat to our stability. I call him the solution to our blindness. He has shown us the enemy's mind. He has earned his place. Valeriana reached out, took Kale's hand, and pulled him forward until they stood shoulder to shoulder. The two figures, one ancient, massive and armored in dark fantasy, the other mortal, technologically advanced and dressed in utilitarian sci-fi gear, were the ultimate contrast. Let the Concordium see my answer. Valeriana's voice thundered, shaking the ancient stained glass windows. Kale Renwick is no longer a prisoner, nor a mere asset. By the ancient, inviolable laws of the Obsidian dynasty, the laws of power and conquest. She leaned down slightly, lifting her chin and meeting the glare of every single general. I hereby grant Captain Kale Renwick the highest, most sacred title of my court, the one that binds him to my life and my war, Valeriana declared. I name him my Warbride. A shockwave of gasps and outraged shouts erupted. Warbride? It was a title reserved for a partner chosen for strategic dominance, for the one who would stand beside the Empress in times of total war. It meant marriage, political fusion, and, most crucially, absolute immunity from outside political and military demands. Lord Zarkin's face was purple with fury. This is treason. This is an insult to our bloodline. A mortal Warbride. Valeriana ignored him, placing the heavy, silver obsidian vow circlet upon Kale's head, a ceremonial act that made the declaration official and legally binding. Let the declaration be sent to High Consul Alaric immediately, Valeriana commanded, the silver circlet contrasting starkly with Kale's dark hair. Tell him that the Kaelan Empress has chosen her ally. Tell him that the Warbride is protected by my crown, my armies and my defiance. Her eyes glowed with dangerous, proud resolve. The Concordium wanted a declaration of war. They have it now. And I will burn the galaxy down before I surrender my Warbride. Kale, standing beside the Empress he was trained to fight, now her shield and her ultimate liability, felt the cold weight of the circlet. He was no longer just a mortal soldier. He was the catalyst for interstellar war, bound by love and defiance to the most powerful woman in the sector. The declaration of the Warbride shattered the Kaelan star system. It wasn't just a political act, it was a schism. Lord Zarkin, backed by General Lyra and the rigid traditionalists, immediately declared Valeriana an empress who had abandoned her ancient duty. Within hours of the transmission to Alaric, a localized civil war erupted on Noctis Prime. Valeriana and Kale found themselves surrounded in the citadel. Their only allies were the loyal Obsidian Guard who followed Valeriana, and most crucially Draken. The primary fleet is divided, Valeriana stated, standing over a tactical map that showed the Kaelan forces splitting into Loyalist and Concordium-aligned factions. Zarkin has taken control of the orbital defense grid. We can't use a primary launch bay. We don't need a launch bay, we need a distraction, Kale said, running a hand over the silver obsidian vow circlet on his head. He was officially the Warbride, but he was still a vanguard captain at heart. Give me Draken and 3 loyalists. I know a weakness in the old Citadel's sub-level maintenance tunnels. It's a one-man job to reach the hidden escape pod dock. Valeriana looked at him, her eyes reflecting the desperate situation. It is suicide, Kale. If they capture the Warbride, the war is lost before it begins. Then we make sure they don't. Kale met her gaze with the fierce resolve that had first intrigued her. Your generals think like vampires, conquest and brute force. They don't think like mortals, infiltration and escape. I'm your mortal weakness, Valeriana, but right now, I'm your mortal strength. She hesitated for a moment, then gave a curt, military nod. Go. Draken will follow your orders implicitly. The escape was a masterpiece of stealth and explosive diversion. While Valeriana and her loyalists fought a delaying action in the throne room, Kale, with Draken's silent, overwhelming force providing cover, navigated the dust-choked, forgotten tunnels. Kale's intimate knowledge of system vulnerabilities, gained from his initial reconnaissance, was their only edge. They reached the hidden dock just as the Citadel's upper levels began to take fire from Zarkin's orbital cannons. They boarded the Crimson Thorn, a small, custom-built Kaelan stealth vessel, designed for private diplomatic missions. Valeriana and Kale strapped into the cockpit. As the small vessel shot out of Noctis Prime's atmosphere, they saw the terrifying spectacle. The Kaelan capital city shrouded in a red light from orbital bombardment, burning itself from the inside. The Galactic Concordium will be here soon, Valeriana said, her jaw tight as she steered the ship into the dark expanse of the Acheron Nebula, a star cluster known for its impossible gravitational fields. They will see the Civil War as their opportunity. We are fugitives, Kale. Stripped of our fleet, our home, and our status. Good, Kale breathed, adjusting his seat. We're finally fighting a war on my terms. Small, fast, and aimed for the head. Where are we going? To the frontier, Valeriana stated, her eyes hard. We have one loyal outpost hidden deep in the nebula, the Shadow Citadel. From there we begin to strike back. Our goal is simple, Warbride. Eliminate High Consul Alaric. If the head of the Concordium falls, the bureaucracy collapses. Kale smirked. A deep infiltration, high-risk assassination mission against the most protected being in the galaxy. Sounds like a Tuesday for a Vanguard captain. Life aboard the Crimson Thorn was tight and claustrophobic, a brutal contrast to the Obsidian Citadel. Kale and Valeriana, the Empress and the Mortal, were forced into intimate proximity, relying solely on each other. The pressure mounted quickly. High Consul Alaric, having anticipated Valeriana's move, unleashed the Vesperian Ghost Fleet, hundreds of Concordium stealth ships whose primary mission was to track down and annihilate the Crimson Thorn. During one near miss in the gravitational chaos of the Acheron Nebula, their ship's cloaking generator was damaged. We have 2 hours before the Vesperians lock onto our energy signature. Valeriana analyzed the damage report, her face pale. They are too fast. They will intercept us before we reach the Shadow Citadel. We need to lose them entirely, Kale said, his mind racing. And we can't outrun them, we have to outthink them. Alaric thinks like a cold machine. He won't expect irrationality. Kale looked at the nebula's map, specifically at a sector labeled the Serpent's Coil. A section of hyperdense, unstable asteroid fields that even the Kalan fleets avoided. I have an idea, but it requires us to exploit my mortality, Kale said. It's highly dangerous, Valeriana. You might hate me for it. I have sacrificed my empire for you, Kale. There is little else I can hate, she replied, her crimson eyes fixed on him. Tell me. The Vesperian ships use advanced thermal and kinetic scanners to navigate this nebula, perfect for tracking a Kalan vessel. But my old Vanguard suit has a kinetic dampener shield, designed for silent human infiltration. Kale tapped the schematics for the Serpent's Coil. If we fly the Thorn into the Serpent's Coil, we'll lose their main tracking systems, but the ship's navigation will fail. Someone has to go outside the ship in a mortal suit and physically guide us through the asteroid field, acting as a blind spot. Valeriana shook her head vehemently. Absolutely not. The gravitational shear in that field would crush your suit, Kale. Even if it didn't, the sheer speed required would kill a mortal from kinetic stress. But it would be a mortal signature. Alaric won't believe it's possible, Kale argued. It's the ultimate blind spot. We have to make a sacrifice, Valeriana. We have to trade my comfort for your freedom. The debate was fierce. Valeriana saw the plan as a cruel, unnecessary risk to the life she had defied the galaxy to protect. Kale saw it as the ultimate tactical necessity, a chance to prove his worth as the Warbride not through firepower, but through sheer, mortal human ingenuity and self-sacrifice. Finally, seeing the clock tick down and the Vesperian pursuit closing in, Valeriana conceded, tears of frustrating rage welling in her eyes. If this kills you, Kale Renwick, I will personally dismantle Alaric and then end my own eternal life. Do you understand the scope of your audacity? Understood, Empress, Kale smiled grimly. Minutes later, Kale, sealed in his Vanguard suit, was tethered to the hull of the Crimson Thorn. Valeriana piloted the ship into the chaotic, crushing darkness of the Serpent's Coil. Kale, relying purely on his human reflexes, microthrusters and split-second calculations, shouted vectors to Valeriana. He was battered, slammed, and nearly ripped from the ship several times by the insane gravity, but he held fast, a single minuscule mortal guide navigating an Empress's vessel through the impossible. When they finally emerged on the other side, the Vesperian Ghost Fleet, relying on their logic, were hopelessly trapped in the coil. Valeriana opened the inner hatch, pulling Kale's shuddering, exhausted body back inside. He was battered and bruised but alive. She ripped off his helmet, pulling him into a desperate, possessive embrace. Never make a choice like that without consulting me, Kale. I did not defy the galaxy to watch you throw your life away for a maneuver. It worked, Kale gasped, his chest aching. That's how mortals win, Valeriana. We make the illogical, desperate choice. And we survive it. Valeriana looked down at the silver circlet on his head, a symbol of their unity and the immense burden they now shared. She realized that Kale was not merely her asset or her lover. He was the unpredictable variable, the mortal gambit, that might just save her shattered empire. The Shadow Citadel was a battered, secret asteroid base, Valeriana's last stronghold. 4 weeks, Kale and Valeriana worked tirelessly, using the Citadel's limited resources and Kale's deep infiltration knowledge to plan the impossible, the assassination of High Consul Alaric. They discovered that Alaric was leading a massive coordination effort from the Concordium Command Hub, a sprawling, multi-layered flagship named the Logical Apex, stationed in the relatively secure, neutral sector of Elysian's Gate. The Logical Apex is protected by 3 layers of energy shielding and a fleet of automated Vesperian drones, Valeriana explained, tracing the path on the holodable. My Kalan ships can breach the outer 2, but the inner shield requires a massive energy output, a sacrifice of our remaining loyal fleet. Don't sacrifice your fleet, Kale interjected. He had spent days studying the Concordium's logistics. Alaric's weakness is his own hyperlogic. He protects the core with technology, not intuition. The final shield, the Aegis Matrix, is designed to repel energy weapons and large vessel breaches. It won't expect a single low-energy source. He brought up a schematic of his Vanguard battlesuit. My suit is designed for kinetic dampening and ultra-low energy signature. If I can get past the second shield, I can use a modified Terranspec EMP device to overload the Aegis Matrix from the inside out. But I have to be within 50 meters of the core generator. Valeriana looked at the distance Kale had to travel, past automated defenses through Vesperian security corridors, and shook her head, fear etched into her ancient eyes. Kale, that is not a strategy. That is a suicide insertion. Your suit will be detected instantly once you breach the second layer. It's a mortal insertion, Kale corrected, the silver Warbride circlet glinting under the dim lights of the Citadel. Alaric is trying to purify the galaxy of mortal volatility. The final action of this war must be that very volatility. When he sees me, a single mortal, breaching his core, he will short-circuit his own tactical thinking. The final battle was a furious, desperate symphony of light and destruction. Valeriana, leading her few remaining loyal vessels, engaged the Concordium fleet at Elysian's Gate. She fought with a terrifying, protective fury, a general defending not her empire, but the life of her partner. As Valeriana's forces engaged the primary fleet, Kale launched his infiltration pod. The pod broke through the first layer of shielding. Valeriana's last remaining heavy cruiser sacrificed itself, generating a massive burst of energy that shattered the second shield, just long enough for Kale's small pod to slip through. Kale landed in the bowels of the Logical Apex. He was alone, a mortal on a machine's warship. The Logical Apex security systems reacted, sending waves of automated Vesperian drones toward him. Kale fought using every trick he had learned in the Vanguard, dodging lasers, utilizing ventilation shafts, and making illogical turns that confused the Vesperian AI. He finally reached the Aegis Matrix generator core. Just as he was about to plant the EMP, a new figure materialized, High Consul Alaric. Alaric's Vesperian body stood rigid, surrounded by his own personal guard of towering, highly armored sentinels. You, Alaric's synthesized voice clicked with contempt. The contaminant. The source of Valeriana's weakness. Your presence here is mathematically impossible. That's the point, Kale panted, raising his EMP device. Your logic failed to account for a factor you can't measure, human recklessness. Alaric raised a single, 3-fingered hand. I anticipated the Kalen's move. I did not anticipate yours. You will be terminated before you can detonate that device. Your death will serve as Valeriana's final lesson in the foolishness of sentiment. The Sentinels raised their weapons, but Kale didn't hesitate. He tossed the EMP device not at the generator, but at the ground between him and Alaric. The resulting localized surge of energy didn't kill Alaric, but it overloaded the command center's internal communications and short-circuited Alaric's personal guards. Kale used the split-second distraction to charge the Vesperian leader. A mortal soldier tackling a hyper-advanced alien diplomat. Kale's advantage was low-tech, brute force and surprise. He managed to dislodge the main processing unit located on Alaric's neck. The effect was instantaneous. Alaric froze, his crystalline eyes clouding over. The entire Logical Apex, the head of the Concordium, began to suffer massive system failures. Valeriana, watching the chaos erupt on the Apex from her ship, knew Kale had succeeded. She used the disruption to fire a precise, final volley at the Apex's command deck. The Logical Apex, stripped of its command and its central logic, was fatally damaged, spiraling into the black. Kale, pulled out of the dying ship in the nick of time by Draken's insertion craft, watched as the head of the Galactic Concordium dissolved into a supernova of political and technological failure. The battle was won. High Consul Alaric was eliminated. The Concordium, relying too heavily on his centralized logic, fractured immediately into dozens of arguing factions. The existential threat to Valeriana's people, and her life with Kale, was gone. The war was over, but the Kaelan Empire was gone. Lord Zarkin and General Lyra were captured, their treacherous faction collapsing immediately after Alaric's defeat. Valeriana had lost her throne, her massive fleet, and her standing as Empress of the Obsidian star system. But she had kept her people safe and she had kept Kael. 1 year later, Kael and Valeriana were not in the Grand Council chamber of Noctis Prime. They were on Ethel, a small, habitable moon on the frontier, a world that had once been one of the Kaelan Empire's most remote agricultural outposts. They stood together on a cliff overlooking a quiet, misty sea. Valeriana was no longer wearing her massive obsidian armor. She wore simple yet elegant, dark robes. Kael stood beside her, his hand resting comfortably on her waist. He still wore the silver obsidian vow circlet, though now it looked less like a shackle and more like a symbol of their hard-won peace. Zarkin and Lyra are in stasis, Valeriana murmured, her eyes softening as they looked at the simple, quiet landscape. My people are rebuilding on the periphery. They still call me Empress, but I refuse the title. You chose something better than an empire, Kael said, pulling her closer. You chose a future that wasn't dictated by duty or tradition. You chose us. Valeriana turned to him, the fear and fury of the war replaced by a deep, ancient love. I chose you, Warbride, she confirmed, using the title that was now their personal bond, not a political one. You taught me that strength is not in eternal life, but in the courage to make a fleeting, mortal decision. She reached up and touched the silver circlet on his head. I defied the Galactic Council for a mortal like you. Cost me everything I had. But in return, I gained everything I ever truly wanted. Peace, purpose, and a partner who would shatter a galaxy for me. Kael leaned down, pressing his forehead to hers. For a mortal like me? I'll take it. Now, about that small solar farm we need to finish building before the rain starts. The immortal Empress and the mortal soldier turned and walked back toward their simple wooden home, leaving the shadows of the old galaxy behind them. The Warbride and the Empress, together they had carved out a new beginning. The move from the dank Terran brig to the opulent prison of Kael's new quarters was jarring. His large windows overlooked the dizzying, mile-high spires of Noctis Prime, a city that never slept but always felt cold. Draken, the Kaelan guard, was a constant, unnerving presence. Kael, true to his Rook designation, spent his confinement analyzing his captor. Valeriana was not just an empress, she was the hub of an ancient, terrifying machine. Kael's daily summons to the strategy rooms became an intellectual battlefield. The atmosphere was always charged, thick with the silent hostility of the Kaelan generals, especially Lord Zarkin and General Lyra. They viewed Kael as an abomination, an insult to their long-lived intellect. One afternoon, the generals were debating a supply route to the Viridian frontier. Zarkin was advocating a direct route, shielded by heavy cruisers. Empress, Zarkin's voice was a low, sneering rumble. The route through the Veil Nebula is standard. It is secured by our patrols. This mortal has nothing to offer but pessimism. Kael stepped up to the holodeble, ignoring Zarkin's presence. The Veil Nebula route is standard because it's predictable. The Concordium knows your standards. They aren't trying to intercept the cruisers, they're trying to target the cargo drops on the frontier. Valeriana raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. Explain, Kael. The Concordium isn't fighting a war of logistics, they're fighting a war of morale. Kael pointed to the Viridian drop sites, which were populated by mortal races under Kaelan rule. If they can't stop your food and medical supplies from leaving Noctis Prime, they'll stop them from reaching the hands of the mortals who depend on you. Result? Panic, riots, and a need for you to divert Kaelan troops away from the front lines to put down internal rebellion. Valeriana's crimson eyes flashed with sharp recognition. She looked at Zarkin, who was sputtering with disbelief. Your strategy guarantees the security of cargo, Zarkin, but risks the loyalty of the people. Kael presented an alternative, a slower, heavily massed route through the KRYL asteroids, using smaller, more numerous transports. It's less efficient but entirely unpredictable. It minimizes the target's value and maximizes the chance the supplies reach the hands that need them. The generals were furious, seeing their traditions undermined by a fleeting human. But Valeriana, ever the pragmatic strategist, nodded slowly. The KRYL route is adopted. Kael, you will oversee its implementation. Lyra, you will provide the escort. General Lyra shot Kael a look that promised a slow, painful death. I will not take orders from this experiment. You will take orders from me, General? Valeriana's voice was low, cutting through the dissent. And Kael speaks sense. In a galaxy run by immortal power, sometimes the most lethal weapon is a mind that knows how to think outside the millennia. Kael knew he had won a small battle, but his victory had only deepened the chasm between him and the rest of the Kaelan court. He was an anomaly, and anomalies were always destined for elimination. As Kael's strategic value increased, so did Valeriana's private interest. She began to spend her evenings in his quarters, not for tactical briefings, but for conversations that skirted the edges of philosophy and identity. One night, she stood by the window, gazing out at the star-dusted night sky, a stark contrast to the red glow of her eyes. "Mortals are such fragile things," she mused. "Your entire existence, your love, your ambition, your victories, is compressed into a single agonizing flash of time. How do you bear the certainty of your own ending?" "We bear it by making the time we have count," Kael replied, sitting at his simple desk. "We don't have time for millennia of feuds, Valeriana. We have to make decisions now. We have to love now. That urgency, that pressure, it's what makes us sharp." Valeriana turned, a look of profound loneliness washing over her face. "My life is spent undoing the mistakes of the previous 5 centuries. My ancestors' blood feuds still dictate my borders. My time is not my own, it is the property of my entire history." Kael saw past the Empress to the woman burdened by immortality. He recognized the exhaustion. "You're trapped by your own endlessness," Kael noted quietly. "You can't make a spontaneous choice because the consequences will outlive the person who made the decision 10 times over. I, on the other hand, could be dust by morning. I have nothing to lose by being honest." He walked over to her. The height difference was still there, the difference in power was immense, but Kael closed the gap with his sheer presence. "And what is it, Kael, that you have been honest about?" Valeriana challenged, her voice dropping to a whisper. "The fact that you crave chaos. That your court bores you. That you like the way I look at you, not as a queen, but as a brilliant opponent worth studying," Kael said, placing his hand gently on her armored sleeve. The cool metal met his warm skin. "And the fact that I'm terrified of you, but the fear is overwhelmed by the interest." Valeriana reached up, her finger tracing the scar above his brow, a relic from a Terran skirmish. The touch, usually so deliberate, was tentative. "A fascinating species indeed. So willing to ignite a fire you know will consume you. A short, bright life is better than an endless, cold one," Kael murmured. Their proximity was a violation of every Kaelan law. They were the opposing forces of the universe, the brief warmth of life and the cold permanence of undeath. Yet, in that stolen moment they found a strange, compelling equilibrium. That night, their forbidden connection deepened, born not from lust alone, but from a desperate need to break free from their destined roles. They were allies first, then lovers, a pairing that made no sense but felt utterly inevitable. The growing intimacy fueled Valeriana's confidence and Kael's recklessness. Their combined strategies, melding Kaelan firepower with Terran guerrilla tactics, began to yield small but decisive victories against the Concordium's forces on the periphery. This success, however, terrified the old guard. Lord Zarkin saw his own influence waning and knew Kael was the cause. Zarkin staged a confrontation in the strategy room, not about tactics but about Kael's presence itself. "Empress, your success is admirable, but look at the source. The mortality of this thing is corrupting our eternal purpose. Our bloodline is being tainted by a fleeting species." "My decisions are final, Zarkin," Valeriana said, her tone growing dangerously cold. "And how far will this taint go?" Zarkin snarled, taking a final, desperate risk. He projected the captured, encrypted footage, the proof of Kael and Valeriana's secret kiss from Chapter 3. The room froze. The images of the Empress embracing a mortal were horrifyingly clear. "This is not strategy. This is blasphemy," Zarkin roared, his eyes wide with triumphant malice. "The mortal is not an asset. He is a genetic contagion. He must be purged before he poisons the entire dynasty." Valeriana did not flinch, but her gaze was a pure, focused crimson flame. The exposure was catastrophic. This was not just insubordination, it was a coup attempt disguised as a moral judgment. Before Valeriana could react, a subtle, cold chime echoed through the room. It was an urgent, Priority 1 transmission from the Galactic Concordium. High Consul Alaric knew. The Vesperian spies had been waiting for just such a vulnerability. The transmission projected Alaric's cold, emotionless face onto the holodeble. "Lady Valeriana Noctis," Alaric's voice clicked dryly. "The Concordium has intercepted irrefutable evidence of your unlawful alliance with the Terran lifeform Kael Renwick. We view this union as a deliberate act of political destabilization and biological contamination," Alaric stated. "You have compromised your rule and your race. The Kaelan Empire is hereby deemed unstable and hostile to galactic order." The ultimatum was delivered with clinical precision. Surrender the mortal contaminant for immediate termination and publicly renounce all Terran alliances, or face the combined military might of the Concordium. The hour of judgment is upon you. Alaric's projection vanished. The strategy room was plunged into an echoing silence, punctuated only by Valeriana's sharp, furious breath. Zarkin and Lyra stood frozen, horrified that their petty coup had immediately triggered a full-scale interstellar war. Valeriana slowly turned to Kale, the weight of 1,000 years pressing down on her. Kale simply met her eyes, the silent question passing between them, "What now?" Valeriana looked around the silent, terrified room. She looked at the generals who had betrayed her with their fear, and at the man who had given her a reason to fight. The choice was clear, painful, and glorious. "Ready the primary broadcast channels," Valeriana commanded, her voice terrifyingly calm. The time for whispering was over. The time for war had begun. The silence following High Consul Alaric's ultimatum was the heaviest sound Kale had ever experienced. It wasn't the silence of peace, but of a vacuum before an explosion. Lord Zarkin finally broke it, his voice tight with desperation. "Empress, Alaric has given us a way out. Execute the mortal. It is politically expedient. Save the star system." General Lyra, recovering from the shock, stepped forward. "We can blame it on Zarkin's unauthorized transmission, Valeriana. Claim you were blackmailed. Cut the contagion out now, and we can negotiate a ceasefire before the Concordium mobilizes the Iron Fleet." Valeriana stood at the head of the holotable, her armored frame rigid. Kale watched her, his own heart pounding with the reality of the situation. He knew the weight of her decision. She could save millions by condemning him, fulfilling the political role she was born for. "Valeriana," Kale said softly, stepping closer, ignoring the armed sentinels who now had him targeted. "Don't do this for me. Choose your empire. I'm a soldier, I knew the risks." Valeriana slowly raised her hand, silencing everyone, even Kale. Her crimson eyes, usually so cold, now burned with a terrible mixture of rage and clarity. "I will not," she stated, her voice calm and terrifying. "I will not concede to Alaric's blackmail. I will not murder a being who has given me better counsel in weeks than my generals have given in centuries." She turned to Kale, a fleeting, fierce look of alliance passing between them. "And I will not trade my freedom for a peace dictated by fear. If I kill you, I prove to Alaric that I am predictable, that I am weak, and that I can be ruled by their ultimatums. It won't save us, it will merely delay our destruction until they invent the next pretext." Valeriana raised her voice, directing her words to Zarkin and Lyra. "The Concordium is not judging Kale Renwick. They are judging me. They want to see the Kaelan Empress crumble. I refuse to give them that satisfaction. We are preparing for a full planetary broadcast," Valeriana commanded Draken, who stood unmoving, a statue of loyalty. "I will address the entire star system and the galaxy. Zarkin, Lyra, if you move against me or against my chosen partner, I will declare you traitors and execute you personally. Consider that your final warning." The generals were paralyzed by her absolute authority. They had pushed her to the brink, and Valeriana had met their challenge not with retreat, but with a declaration of total war. The atmosphere in the Grand Council chamber had never been so volatile. Every general, every noble, and every diplomatic envoy remained, their faces a mix of terror and eager anticipation. The entire Kaelan star system was tuned in, waiting to hear if their empress would execute the mortal or plunge them into war. Valeriana emerged not just in her armor, but in her full obsidian regalia, a heavy, ancient crown atop her head. She was the personification of ancient Kaelan power. She stood at the podium, and Kale stood slightly behind her, wearing a clean vanguard uniform, the silent, human symbol of her defiance. "People of the Kaelan star system, and observers of the Galactic Concordium," Valeriana began, her voice amplified to reach every corner of the vast, oppressive chamber. "The High Consul Alaric of the Concordium has issued an ultimatum. He demands the death of the Terran captain, Kale Renwick, based on what he calls evidence of contamination and moral weakness." A ripple of angry murmurs spread through the crowd, fueled by Zarkin and Lyra's faction. Valeriana raised her hand, silencing them. "The Concordium believes that the Kaelan Empire is a static, predictable institution. They believe our decisions are dictated by ancient, cold protocol. They believe we will choose the comfort of tradition over the necessity of evolution." She paused, and her eyes, filled with deep, conscious resolve, found Kale's. "They are wrong," she declared. "Kale Renwick has shown this empire more truth, better strategy, and deeper loyalty in his fleeting mortal lifespan than any general has in the past century." Valeriana turned, her motion fluid and powerful, and took Kale's hand in her own. Her armored grip was strong, an anchor in the storm. High Consul Alaric claims that the union between Kaelin and mortal is biologically catastrophic. I say it is strategically essential. Her voice rose to a dramatic crescendo. I did not bring Kael Renwick here for weakness. I brought him here for strength. I have not allowed his mortal presence to taint my lineage. I have allowed his mortal insight to sharpen my command. She pulled Kael forward, facing the shocked, silent council. She reached for the heavy silver circlet, the obsidian vow, which was not a wedding ring, but an object of political and military binding. By the sacred, inviolable laws of the Obsidian dynasty, which permit the Empress to choose her partner in times of existential war, a partner who commands absolute loyalty and political immunity, I now exercise my right. Valeriana's voice echoed off the ancient, stained glass. I hereby declare Captain Kael Renwick my chosen consort, my commander, and the eternal protected leader of the Kaelin military forces. She placed the circlet on Kael's head. The silver glowed, an intense contrast to his vanguard uniform. He is no longer a mortal captive. He is the Kaelin Warbride. The chamber erupted in absolute chaos. Gasps, cheers from the loyalists, and screams of outrage from Zarkin's faction filled the hall. The broadcast instantly captured the Warbride and the Empress side by side, united against the universe. Valeriana fixed her gaze on the main broadcast lens, addressing Alaric directly. The answer to your ultimatum, High Consul, is defiance. I will protect my Warbride, and together, we will burn your Concordium to ashes. Valeriana's declaration acted as a dual trigger. Externally, the Galactic Concordium immediately declared a state of total war. Alaric mobilized the massive Iron Fleet towards the Kaelin star system, issuing public communiques about the corrupted Empress and the necessity of purifying the sector. Internally, Lord Zarkin and General Lyra saw their last chance to salvage the situation slip away. They could not tolerate a mortal Warbride. Zarkin roared, drawing an ancient, vibrating energy blade. Treason. She has betrayed the blood. Soldiers, arrest the contaminated Empress and the mortal. The Obsidian Guard, who had served Valeriana for decades, hesitated. They were split between ancient loyalty to the Empress's crown and allegiance to the aristocratic Zarkin. Draken, Valeriana's loyal guard, was the first to move. He stepped forward, drawing his massive two-handed energy lance and planting it firmly between the Empress and the attacking Zarkin. The Warbride is protected by the vow, Draken announced, his voice devoid of emotion, yet ringing with absolute fealty. To strike the Warbride is to strike the Empress. You are a traitor, Zarkin. The chamber immediately dissolved into a brutal firefight. Kaelin Guard fought Kaelin Guard, plasma bolts melted the ancient stone, and the blood of immortals began to stain the obsidian floor. We must leave. Now. Kael yelled, grabbing Valeriana's armored arm. Zarkin controls the orbital grid. We're trapped. My ship. Valeriana cried, pointing toward the emergency access tunnel. The Crimson Thorn is in the hidden dock. We go now. As Valeriana and Kael, with Draken covering their retreat, fought their way through the collapsing citadel, the full horror of the situation set in. Zarkin's faction was already seizing control of the star system's defenses. Kael looked back at the burning citadel, his new silver circlet catching the violent light of the explosions. He had been a soldier fighting a foreign war. Now he was the Warbride, fighting a war for the woman he loved, against the combined might of his own species' allies and her vengeful people. They reached the hidden dock and boarded the small, stealthy Crimson Thorn. As they prepared for launch, Kael initiated a final, desperate tactical move. He accessed the Citadel's main power grid and initiated a controlled feedback loop into Zarkin's main communication spire. What are you doing? Valeriana asked, piloting the ship. Disrupting their coordination, Kael replied, his fingers flying over the console. This won't stop them, but it buys us 10 minutes of chaos. It's what a mortal does, Valeriana. Cause maximum damage and then disappear. The Crimson Thorn shot out of the docks just as Zarkin's spire exploded in a silent, blinding flash. Valeriana set the coordinates, not for another Kaelin planet, but for the uncharted, dangerous depths of the Acheron Nebula. They were fugitives now, but they were together, armed with a tiny ship and a massive, forbidden vow. The Crimson Thorn was a vessel built for elegance, not for sustained warfare or life support. Yet it was home to the Empress and her Warbride, speeding away from the burning wreckage of their former lives. The voyage through the Acheron Nebula was grueling. The nebula, a vast ancient field of stellar dust and rogue gravity wells, was a navigator's nightmare. It was Valeriana's strategic choice precisely because the Concordium's hyperlogical navigation system struggled with such unpredictable environments. Inside the tight confines of the ship, the power dynamics between Valeriana and Kale shifted rapidly. Stripped of her court and her armor, she wore only a flexible, lighter command suit now. Valeriana was vulnerable. Kale, however, was in his element, resourceful, hands-on, and focused on survival. The life support recycling is insufficient for my biology, Valeriana stated one evening, monitoring the environmental controls. Kalen require a higher nitrogen ratio and controlled kinetic pressure. This ship was not meant for long-term Kalen occupation. I know, Kale replied, working to patch a burnt-out coil in the ship's engine core. But it's what we have. I've rerouted the kinetic stabilizers. They were too sensitive for the nebula's drag anyway. It'll give us an extra hour of life support optimization, but it's jury-rigged. Valeriana watched him work. His mortal hands, trained for war and infiltration, moved with surprising mechanical grace. You operate with such brutal efficiency, she commented. There is no pretense, no historical precedent, only the immediate fix. It is liberating. It's survival, Valeriana, Kale stated, wiping a streak of grease from his cheek. When you're immortal, time is a resource you spend freely. When you're mortal, it's a debt you have to repay quickly. We don't have time to mourn the Empire. We have to win this war. The difference in their perspective often led to friction. Valeriana would plan a grand, sweeping tactical maneuver, while Kale focused on disabling a single sensor array with minimal energy output. Their love was fierce and possessive, but their professional dynamic was a constant, necessary clash of ancient power and immediate ingenuity. Meanwhile, the Crimson Thorn's stealth was failing. High Consul Alaric had predicted their flight path. He deployed the specialized Vesperian Ghost Fleet, smaller, highly automated Concordium vessels equipped with biospecific scanners designed to detect Kalen life signs, and more worryingly, Kale's uniquely low mortal biosignature. The close call came days later. Draken, standing sentry, issued a low, guttural warning. Empress. Warbride. Multiple contacts. Vesperian signatures. They are closing fast, Draken reported from the cockpit. Valeriana rushed to the controls. The main screen lit up with the telltale spectral outlines of the Ghost Fleet, silent hunters closing in. They found a weakness in the nebula's density. They're using a coordinated sensor mesh. We can't outrun them, Kale. We can't outfight them either, not in this tub. Kale grabbed the holomap, his eyes darting across the Serpent's coil, the unstable asteroid field they had discussed. Our only chance is the coil. They won't risk their automated logic in there. Valeriana scoffed, remembering their previous conversation. We barely survived that passage once. The damage to the stabilizers is too great now. If the ship cannot stabilize, the gravitational shear will crush the hull instantly. Then we make sure the ship doesn't have to stabilize, Kale said, his voice hard with purpose. He quickly modified the plan he'd presented in the unexpanded Chapter 7. I'm going outside. But I'm not just guiding you. I'm taking the ship's kinetic suppression field generator with me. Valeriana stared at him, horrified. What madness is this? The coil is chaos. The Vesperians rely on their predictable ability to filter out that chaos. We will make the chaos absolute, Kale explained rapidly. If I activate the generator outside, my body, my mortal mass, will act as a temporary focusing lens, creating a single localized area of kinetic nullification. The Crimson Thorn will ride in that brief, perfect pocket of stability, while the rest of the coil is thrown into violent disruption. It's a temporary effect, Kale. The strain will kill you even with your suit. Valeriana protested, gripping his shoulders. You are deliberately making yourself the point of highest stress. That's how mortals win, Valeriana. We turn our greatest vulnerability into the enemy's blind spot. Kale argued, his eyes flashing with the zeal of a soldier dedicated to an impossible mission. Alaric is looking for a Kalen Empress to surrender. He's not looking for a mortal Warbride to sacrifice himself for a tactical escape. Valeriana knew there was no time left for debate. The Vesperian fleet was almost upon them. She leaned in, her gaze intense. If you die, Kale, I will not only destroy the Concordium, I will find your lineage on Terra and elevate them to the stars in your name. Do not mistake my compliance for forgiveness. Understood, Kale smiled grimly. Now open the goddamn airlock. The insertion was immediate and brutal. Kale, tethered to the ship's hull, activated the repurposed generator. He felt the sickening pull of the nebula's gravitational fields trying to tear him limb from limb. The Vanguard suit screamed in protest, but it held. Kale's body was now the mortal anchor, the tiny kinetic focal point in a storm of absolute energy. Valeriana, piloting the Crimson Thorn, drove the ship into the Serpent's coil. The ship shuddered violently, but Kale's localized field held a momentary pocket of calm around the hull. Vector 4 Gamma, Empress. Now, before the field collapses. Kale screamed into the comms, his voice ragged, fighting against the crushing pressure. Valeriana executed the impossible maneuver, weaving the thorn through the tumbling, house-sized asteroids. For Kale, it was a blur of near misses and agonizing kinetic feedback. His vision tunneled. His muscles strained to keep the field stable. He was taking damage the Vanguard suit was never designed to endure. Meanwhile, the Vesperian Ghost Fleet, relying on their rigid sensors, tried to follow. But Kale's unexpected kinetic manipulation of the coil caused the asteroid field to react violently. Vesperian ships, unable to process the irrational level of chaos, were crushed by the unstable gravity and debris. As they finally emerged into the safety of clear space, Kale's field collapsed. He hung limply on the tether, his suit flashing red with critical warnings. Valeriana pulled the ship into a silent drift and rushed to the airlock. She dragged Kale's broken, shuddering body back into the ship. She ripped off his helmet, her hands trembling. Kale was gasping for air, bruised but alive. Valeriana held him tight, her face buried in his neck, the immortal Empress clinging to the fragile, life-scented body of her Warbride. You risked everything. Your mortality is a weapon you wield with terrifying efficiency, she whispered, her voice rough with emotion. It's all I have, Kale managed, resting his aching head against her shoulder. Valeriana pulled back, her eyes burning with fierce pride and newfound determination. You are more than the title I gave you in a political frenzy, Kale Renwick. You are the only anchor I have in this chaos. And you have just bought us the time we need to reach the Shadow Citadel. The threat of the Concordium's immediate pursuit was gone. Kale's mortal gambit had worked. They had escaped, and their forbidden bond was now forged in the fires of mutual sacrifice. They had one loyal vessel, one loyal guard, Draken, and a desperate plan to assassinate High Consul Alaric. The Shadow Citadel, a hidden asteroid fortress, was a stark contrast to the opulence of Noctis Prime. Here, Kale, Valeriana, and Draken, along with a handful of remaining loyalists, prepared for the ultimate gamble. High Consul Alaric was mobilizing the largest fleet in Concordium history for a final, decisive push against the Kalan sector. His flagship, the Logical Apex, was the nerve center of the entire operation, protected by state-of-the-art defenses. The Logical Apex is stationary at Elysian's Gate, Valeriana stated, pointing to a shimmering point on the holodouble. It's a trap. He wants me to waste my remaining forces against his drone fleet. He wants you to fight like an empress, all power and prestige, Kale agreed, his face grim. He had been studying the schematics of the Apex for days. But we won't. The Apex has redundant power systems, triple-layered shields, and automated defenses that can track a mosquito. We can't punch through. He brought up the internal schematics of the flagship, focusing on the Aegis Matrix core, the final layer of defense. Alaric's confidence is his weakness. He designed the Aegis Matrix to withstand high-energy Kalan attacks. But he overlooked low-energy kinetic breaches. Something he considers primitive. Kale tapped the spot where the main energy conduit met the ventilation shaft. I'm going in alone. I'll use the final loyalist forces to create a localized, energy-heavy diversion on the starboard side. That will force the Apex to divert massive power to that shield, creating a temporary 5-second power gap in the Aegis Matrix. Valeriana gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white. 5 seconds, Kale? And you think you can navigate through the internal defenses and reach the main conduit? I don't think, Valeriana. I know, Kale said, meeting her eyes with fierce conviction. I was trained for 10 years to be the impossible variable. I will get through the vents, past the sentinels, and plant this. He held up a small, highly compressed Terran-spec EMP bomb. A tiny, mortal device to dismantle the greatest machine in the galaxy. You are throwing your fleeting life into an impossible equation, Valeriana whispered, her voice laced with fear. If you fail, the Kalan cease to exist. If I succeed, Alaric's centralized command structure collapses. The Concordium falls into immediate chaos, buying your people the time they need to rebuild, Kale countered. This is my purpose now, Valeriana. I didn't become your Warbride to sit back. I became your weapon. Valeriana looked at the mortal man who had become her destiny. She couldn't order him to stop. To do so would be to revert to the fear-based rules she was trying to escape. She nodded, a single, agonizing movement. Then let us prepare, my Warbride. Let the final gambit begin. The battle at Elysian's Gate was a beautiful, devastating spectacle. Valeriana, aboard her final flagship, the Obsidian Wraith, led the charge. She fought not as a queen, but as a wounded predator, her tactics brilliant and desperate. The Concordium fleet was vast, but Valeriana's attack was surgically precise. She forced the logical apex to commit maximum defense to the starboard shield, just as Kale had predicted. Meanwhile, Kale's infiltration pod slipped through the carnage. He breached the second shield and entered the cold, clinically silent ventilation system of the apex. He moved like smoke, a low-energy signature bypassing high-energy alarms. His mortal mind was an asset here, anticipating the Vesperian AI's predictable movement patterns. As he reached the core access vent, he finally ran into a defense he couldn't bypass. High Consul Alaric's personal sentinel guard, massive, automated Kalen spec machines, likely captured and repurposed by Alaric. Kale fought with the savage, brutal efficiency of a cornered human. He was battered, but his small, flexible body could dart around the colossal machines. He finally used a small explosive charge to seal the tunnel behind the sentinels, buying himself precious seconds. He entered the central chamber. There, in the sterile, brightly lit room, stood High Consul Alaric. The Vesperian was imposing, surrounded by a faint blue energy field, monitoring the battle with his cold, crystalline eyes. "The contaminant," Alaric clicked, his synthesized voice cutting the silence. "I observe you, Kale Renwick. Your success rate reached 87% up until this point. Your probability of survival now registers at 0.003%. Never tell a mortal the odds, Alaric," Kale panted, raising his EMP device. "Your device is insufficient." "My Aegis matrix can deflect a localized EMP," Alaric stated, a flicker of what Kale realized was Vesperian arrogance in his tone. "I will not make Valeriana's error. I will purge the contamination myself." Alaric moved, his speed surprising, his form a blur of metallic insectoid grace. But Kale didn't aim the EMP at the core. He aimed it at Alaric's central logic processor, the exposed unit on the Vesperian's chest. "You plan for eternity, Alaric. I only plan for the next 5 seconds." Kale screamed, charging the Vesperian. The physical clash was brief and violent. Kale dodged a killing blow and slammed the EMP directly into Alaric's chest plate. The device didn't explode. It discharged a focused low-energy, high-frequency pulse. Alaric seized up immediately. His crystalline eyes flickered wildly. The Vesperian wasn't physically damaged, but his mind, his hyperlogic, was overloaded by the sudden, irrational input. His entire body twitched, unable to process the unpredictable mortal aggression. As Alaric froze, the Aegis matrix around the logical apex collapsed, leaving the central command deck exposed. "Valeriana. Now!" Kale yelled into his comms, grabbing the inert Alaric and using him as a shield as alarms blared across the ship. Valeriana, seeing the Aegis matrix flicker out, didn't hesitate. "Fire everything. Target the main bridge." The Obsidian Wraith's final volley of plasma and kinetic slugs slammed into the logical apex's vulnerable bridge. The great Concordium flagship exploded in a spectacular, silent mushroom cloud of fire and debris. High Consul Alaric, the architect of the Concordium's cold logic, was destroyed. Kale was pulled out of the dying ship by Draken's rapid extraction craft moments before the apex was consumed by the fire. He was bruised, bleeding, and utterly exhausted. The battle was won. The immediate effect was glorious chaos. With the logical apex gone and High Consul Alaric annihilated, the vast Concordium fleet, designed for centralized command, immediately splintered. The Vesperian forces, unable to operate without their central logic, scattered and retreated, their authority evaporated. The war was over, but the Kalen Empire was a shadow of its former self. Valeriana and Kale returned to the Shadow Citadel. The surviving loyal Kalen forces gathered, battered but triumphant. Lord Zarkin and General Lyra were captured and placed into stasis, their betrayal nullified by Valeriana's ultimate victory. In the quiet of the Citadel's command center, Valeriana finally faced Kale. She was still in her battle suit, exhausted but regal. She knelt before him, a startling, unprecedented gesture. "You saved us," she stated, her voice thick with emotion. "You, the mortal I was meant to despise. You faced the entire galaxy's order, and you broke it with sheer, volatile human courage." "We did it, Valeriana," Kale corrected, helping her up. "I just pushed the button. You made the impossible choice to stand by me." Valeriana took off her heavy crown, placing it on the holotable. "I am done being the empress of the past. The empire I saved is a broken thing. My people need a new direction, a new ruler." "You are their ruler," Kale insisted. "No," Valeriana shook her head. "I am their protector. And my protection is anchored here with you." She looked at the silver obsidian vow circlet on his head, the title of Warbride no longer a political statement, but a testament to their mutual victory. We will not return to Noctis Prime. We will not rebuild the old dynasty, Valeriana declared. We will find a neutral ground, a place where the Kaelin can rebuild outside the shadow of the Concordium and our own history. We will rule a new, smaller domain focused on peace and defense. Kael smiled, his heart swelling with a warmth that rivaled the cold fire of her immortal love. A new beginning. Just you and me building a life that shouldn't exist. 1 year later, on the small green planet of Ethel, Kael and Valeriana were building their new life. Ethel was a world of misty forests and tranquil seas, now home to the remnants of the loyal Kaelin population. Valeriana and Kael ruled not from an obsidian throne, but from a modest, purpose-built command post. The silver circlet of the Warbride was the only remaining symbol of Kael's title, a beautiful contrast to his practical Terran-style clothing. Valeriana was pregnant, an impossible, unprecedented consequence of the union between Kaelin and mortal, a living symbol of their defiance. Kael watched Valeriana, her immortal strength now dedicated to the care of their new domain and their shared future. The patrols are reporting a small fleet of Terran coalition ships near the perimeter, Valeriana noted, smiling softly. They are looking for Captain Kael Renwick. He is still listed as a rogue agent. They'll never find him, Kael replied, putting his arms around her. Captain Renwick died with the logical apex. Valeriana leaned back into his embrace, gazing up at the 2 moons of Ethel. The galaxy will whisper stories about the vampire empress who destroyed an empire for her mortal soldier. They will call it the greatest love and the greatest mistake. Let them talk, Kael said, kissing the top of her head. We won our war. We chose a destiny that was our own, not one dictated by fate or counsel. He was immortal. She was an immortal. But together they were the founders of a new dynasty, built on defiance, love and the quiet, fierce victory of the Warbride who defied the entire galactic order.